Let's make the most incredible Italian panettone bread from my new cookbook, Simple Pleasures. Panettone is an incredibly soft and fluffy sweet bread enjoyed during Christmas, New Year's, and the holidays in general. It's buttery like brioche and scented with citrus. It really smells like Christmas. Oggi facciamo il panettone fatto in casa. Now, traditional methods for making panettone require time, skill, and there's an elaborate process to follow. Traditionally, it takes 3 whole days. Talk about dedication. It uses something called a sourdough biga to start the process, and when you've baked it, you have to hang it upside down to cool, otherwise it will completely collapse. It's like a high-maintenance bread girlfriend. But today, I'm going to show you a much easier technique. No biga, no waiting for days, and no cooling it upside down. We're going to make panettone in just one day, no fuss, and still end up with a result that's identical to the best traditional versions. So this Christmas, leave that supermarket panettone for those relatives you really don't like, and make your very own homemade panettone for those who treat you well. To get started, we need to talk mix-ins and dried fruit. Now, traditionally, panettone wants a mixture of candied lemon and orange peel and raisins. My mom makes her very own candied lemon peel, and this stuff is amazing. It adds the most delicious aroma and it melts in your mouth. I'll give you her recipe on my website if you want to make it. Please do not use store-bought candied peel. It just tastes of sugar. Now, of course, I'm not here to tell you to make your own. You can just leave it out and substitute it with an extra orange. You'll also need raisins, or in my case, dried cranberries. Raisins are traditional. I'm not a fan. I prefer dried cranberries, which are deliciously tangy. Now, we're going to soak the dried fruit. We need to cover it with hot water. You want enough water to cover the fruit. Set aside for 10 minutes. The water will soften the raisins, or in my case, dried cranberries, and make them plump up. You can also soak the fruit in alcohol, but head over to my website for instructions on how to do that. Now we're going to activate the yeast. We do this whether we're using instant or active dry yeast because panettone dough is heavily enriched with egg yolks and butter. We want to give the yeast a head start. Heat the milk and water for 30 seconds, just until warm. Add the yeast and stir to combine. Set aside for 10 minutes or until the mixture starts to foam. Now for this method, it's super important we use a commercial yeast and not sourdough starter. You'll see why later on. Now I developed this recipe to use all-purpose flour. Just make sure it's at least 11% protein. Some people like to use stronger flours, and you can if you want. I talk more about this in the written recipe on my website. To the bowl of your stand mixer, add the flour, reserving about 1 cup. We want to avoid overloading the motors of our home stand mixers. You'll add the remaining flour as we make the recipe. I've added the sugar and salt, and you're going to add orange zest and lemon zest. Now, as I quickly mentioned before, if you're not using candied fruit, you can get the same exact aroma just by using an extra large orange. I do like to zest my fruit directly over the sugar, then take your fingers and gently exfoliate the lemon and orange zest with the sugar. This releases so much lemon oil and flavor. Add the yeast mixture, egg yolks, and vanilla. You want to knead on medium speed until the dough comes together. Once the dough comes together, allow this to mix for a good 8 to 15 minutes. As you're mixing your dough, if your mixer can handle the amount of dough, you can start adding the extra flour we reserved. We're going to be kneading this dough for a long time, so we don't want to stress the motor. This is why we're adding the remaining flour slowly. Increase the speed to high and continue kneading. It's really important to allow the gluten to develop properly before adding the butter. So please do not be tempted to add the butter early on. Be patient here. When the gluten network has developed properly, the dough will pull away from the sides of the bowl, and you will be able to do the window pane test really easily. You can see we're not quite there yet. The dough is not stretchy. It starts to tear. Rather than timing, visuals are key when making bread. In total, I mixed my panettone dough for 15 minutes. And this is how good, proper panettone dough should look. It should be stretchy, and you should be able to see your fingers underneath the dough. At this point, we're ready to add the softened butter. While continuing to knead, Gradually add the butter, 1 or 2 tablespoons at a time. The dough will look strange at first. Give it a chance to absorb the butter. As we add the butter, let me tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp, which is an online therapy platform. For those of you who've been around since the beginning of the channel, you'll know it's no secret I struggle with severe anxiety. I find baking very therapeutic, but one thing that really helps is therapy. There's nothing wrong with seeking help, and online therapy can be a great option for those who feel more comfortable opening up from the comfort of their own home. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who's trained to listen and give professional, unbiased advice. You can have your therapy sessions as a phone call, video call, or even via messaging if you prefer. You fill out a questionnaire to help understand your needs and your struggles, and then you'll get matched with a therapist in most cases within 48 hours. They have over 30,000 therapists, which means you have access to a wide range of expertise. You'll then be able to set a time and day to call your therapist. Now, if you've been in therapy before, you'll know it may take some time to find the right match, the right therapist for you. But with BetterHelp, you can easily switch to a new therapist and no additional cost. Over 4 million people have been using BetterHelp to start living a better life. If you think you can benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/emmasgoodies. Clicking the link helps support this channel, and it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps. Once the butter is incorporated, continue kneading for another 3 minutes. If you have any extra flour left over, now is the time to add it. I only had about 2 tablespoons left of flour. I felt my dough was perfect as is, so I did not add it. The dough should look supple, smooth, and feel tacky. You're going to drain the dried fruit and add it to the dough. Mix for about 30 seconds. It's okay if the fruit isn't evenly distributed because we will take care of that with the stretch and folds. Yes, we will be doing stretch and folds. Now let's build some strength in the dough right away for its first rise. You're going to transfer the dough onto a buttered or oiled work surface and flatten it into a thin, square, rectangular shape. Woo! Look at that bubble. Looks so cool. Fold it in half and in half again. Just this quick folding step will already give it more strength. You want to shape the dough into a ball and transfer it into a large greased bowl. Cover it and allow the dough to rise in a warm place. Because this dough contains so much butter, it's a full stick of butter, okay? It's important that it's not cold where it's rising. If the dough gets cold, the butter will start to solidify and that will stop the dough rising. So pop this in a warm area and allow to rise for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, using wet hands, gently add more folds. These folds create the beginning of the finished panettone's light texture. You want to repeat the folding process 4 more times at 30-minute intervals. So cover the bowl and come back in 30 minutes. Now you might have seen me using this technique before in other no-knead bread recipes. It's exactly the same process. Now as mentioned before, I'm using all-purpose flour today as my cookbook Simple Pleasures is all about cooking simple food using pantry staples. And in most homes, all-purpose flour is a pantry staple. However, you can of course use strong bread flour to get a more aerated panettone structure. Now you might be wondering if you could just make the dough by hand. And the thing is, you could, but remember you would have to do at least 3 hours of stretch and folds to develop enough gluten before adding the butter and then continue with more stretch and folds. It would take a very long time, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure you would be able to develop a really strong gluten network that can hold such a tall bread structure. After 2 hours, and after the various stretch and folds, we're ready to shape the panettone. You can easily find panettone molds online. I get mine on Amazon. I'll leave a link to the ones I'm using on my website. You can make 1 big panettone or 2 smaller ones. I'm going to cut my dough in half since I'll be making 2 versions, but obviously if you're making only 1 panettone, you won't have to do this. Using wet hands, gently transfer the dough into the mold with the rough side facing down, leaving a smooth surface on top of the dough ball. The smooth taut surface on top of the ball is important because it will encourage the dough to rise upwards and evenly in the mold. Lightly grease the top of the panettone with oil and cover it with plastic wrap. The oil will prevent the plastic wrap from sticking to the dough. Make sure the top surface of the dough is completely covered with the plastic wrap to prevent the panettone from drying out. Allow the dough to rise until it reaches the top of the mold. For me, this usually takes about 3 hours. Remember, you want to place the panettone in a warm spot. Do not proceed with the recipe until the dough has risen to the top of the mold. You're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and gently brush the top with egg wash. I'm going to leave one panettone as is, and I'm going to cover the other one with pearl sugar and flaked almonds. Not only does the sugar and almonds create a nice crunch, but this adds so much flavor. You want to place the tray on the bottom rack of the oven away from the heat source. To start with, bake for 20 minutes, then quickly but carefully open the oven and place a sheet of aluminum foil on top of the panettone. This will prevent the top from burning. Continue baking for 30 to 40 minutes more. The total baking time should be 50 minutes to 1 hour. You want to leave the panettone in the paper mold to cool, but take it off the baking sheet. You don't have to hang the panettone upside down because we used commercial yeast. You want to let the panettone cool for at least 2 hours before slicing into it. Panettone is really versatile. Just a simple slice is perfect after your holiday meal, or it makes an easy, indulgent holiday breakfast. It's soft and fluffy. This truly tastes like Christmas.